Are you worried about parenting? I know if you're going through your family building journey, it may be in the back of your mind, maybe not in the front of your mind, but it could be adding more anxiety to your life. I know when I was going through my family building journey, I worried about it. And lots of the people I see worry about it. They worry about raising a donor conceived child, how they're going to manage the surrogacy journey, what to do after fertility treatment. There's so many concerns about what to do right and how to manage being a parent, and more pressure if you don't do it in a traditional way. So today I brought on an expert. Her name is Dr. Rebeckah Diamond, and she's a pediatrician who talks about shame and how we can start to think about what's important and separate it from what's not important. So pull up a chair and listen to her advice. She is a very wise pediatrician. Welcome to Building Your Family. This is a podcast about donor conception, surrogacy, fertility treatment, and all the ways the modern family is built. My name's Lisa Schumann. I'm your host. I'm an author, a researcher, a therapist, and I'm delighted to have you here today to talk about something a little bit different than we usually talk about, which is parenting. As you know, if you've been watching me for a while, I feel very strongly about taking the shame out of fertility treatment, out of pursuing parenting, and about parenting. And there's so many worries around becoming a parent, particularly if you're not using traditional methods to become a parent. So I finally found someone who sings from the same tune book that I do, and I'm so glad to introduce you to her. Her name is Dr. Rebeckah Diamond. She is a wonderful pediatrician and a hospitalist at Columbia University Hospital, where we are in New York. And she does so many fantastic things, but she's also published books and has two children herself, which is really remarkable. And she is the author of Eat, Sleep, Tantrum, Repeat, and also How to Parent Like a Pediatrician and Keep Your Toddler Happy and Healthy. And she has such sound advice, which she shares not only in her books, but on social media and everywhere else. And so I thought it would be so helpful for all of you to hear from her today, because you will hear what's important and what's not important. And ultimately, what's important is to take care of yourself and your family and to take shame out of the picture. So welcome, Dr. Diamond. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
My goodness, thank you so much for having me and for that wonderful introduction. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm so glad to see you because, as I said, I see your social media feed and I keep thinking we sing from the same songbook here.
Mm-hmm.
And I see so many people who really struggle. So I wanted to ask you a few questions today just to kind of clear the air and get some sense of what is helpful to think about or not. As you know, most of our viewers are either single moms or same-sex couples or people with infertility problems. And very often there is this idea that there should be some understanding about how to parent and how to be a perfect parent. And if you're not, then you're doing everything wrong and you should feel badly. And many of the people that I see already feel badly about the way they've built their family or about their bodies or about their difficulties in processing their infertility experience. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what should we expect when we first have our kids? What should we expect that we know?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So I think what you are touching on, the universal shame and guilt and all of these negative emotions and feelings that parents are having these days, it's amplified when you're in situations where you're outside of that mainstream parenting narrative for sure. So you're dealing with extra guilt and shame, not necessarily, but you're dealing with all this extra negative emotion because of these expectations that have been put on you. But
Mm-hmm.
even at your baseline, even someone like me who came from a very traditional background and has a very traditional family setup, I found when I had my daughter, and I was a pediatrician, right? So I felt like I should have been prepared more than most. But I found when I had my oldest daughter that I was completely overwhelmed, that the advice that was coming my way was just a sea of conflicting and unrealistic expectations, whether it was
Mm-hmm.
online or even sometimes from my own institutions. It was so rigid and so prescriptive that I just felt constantly paralyzed with anxiety, with just not really knowing how to tune into that inner voice of how to be a parent and do safe scientific things based on good information, but not have my own voice kind of drowned out and have my own confidence totally eroded. So that's where my background lies. It's that kind of marriage of pediatrician advice and scientific advice and, really important, good, accurate guidance, but understanding that we have to learn to have our own parental confidence and we have to have our own voice that we use for parenting. And that's really hard to find this day and age when you are just getting this barrage of things that are inducing guilt and shame, like you said. The big light bulb I had in this journey, and it's been a now 7-year journey of from having my oldest daughter to doing research to writing books to creating my own parenting approach to teaching others how to create their own parenting approach. The light bulb moments that I've had have been realizing that people are really trying to sell you something most of the time.
Yes.
And so, yes, I have books that I am trying, to sell on some level, but mostly I lose money doing what I'm doing. I don't do endorsements and I don't do other sort of promotional things because I don't know how it's really possible to give really good sound advice out there if you are so focused on selling a product or a service. And I will say, and not to say that there aren't good products and services and coaches and counseling. There are plenty of good things out there, but there's not going to be anything that really 100% reflects you and finds your inner voice and shows who you are if it's something that is trying to sell you something. Because in order to sell you something, a product or a service or something in the parenting world has to make you feel like you're missing something, right? It has to make you feel like you are less than as a parent.
Yes. It's fear-based. Yeah.
And it's really it's this fear-based sort of creating some sort of rigid expectation because it's exploiting a real anxiety that's there as a parent. To be a parent is to live in a state of fear and panic, especially nowadays when we don't have the support we need. We don't have the societal and and structural support we need. And if you're coming at this with even fewer supports than I had, whether you're just having one parent in the family or you don't have the same societal support because you have a non-traditional family, you're coming into this with so much understandable anxiety. But the problem is, instead of having people and resources say, okay, here's some good information, here's how you find your way and make the right choices and feel more confident, we have this whole world of online information that's saying the opposite, that's saying, you're right, you're doing a bad job, everything's bad, everything's wrong, buy this, do that instead.
Yes.
Sit here, click, 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 scroll, scroll, scroll.
Right.
And so I really, my own personal journey has been, and I'm not always perfect about it, is how do I tune all of that out? How do I tune out all of the unnecessary noise and find the good information that's out there?
Yes.
So that I can incorporate that and inform my own parenting, but not get overwhelmed with this stress and angst. So that's a long answer to what is shame-based and guilt-based and all this parenting that's there, but it's there, it's everywhere. It's highly related to marketing and other kind of fear-based strategies, but it doesn't have to be what informs you. There are other resources, and I really hope to be able to help parents find the resources out there that are really looking out for them.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. I really, really appreciate that because so often people get triggered by these opinions, right? There's an opinion online. Well, you should feed your baby this, or you should sleep train that way, or you should do this thing or that thing. Or if you're not breastfeeding for X amount of days, there's something wrong with you, or whatever it might be. And one parent might say one thing, another parent might say something, another family member might say something else. And then there are all these opinions involved. And then you've got social media. And yet it's so hard to kind of wipe that all away and go to your pediatrician or go to the American Medical Association or go somewhere where you're going to get clear, correct information rather than all these opinions that come at you, which people feel so vulnerable to and so sucked into believing all this stuff.
And you're exactly right. And the reason I sort of jumped in and did what I did, which is create this sort of, I would say, pediatrician informed guidance, but not just strict by the book pediatric guidance, is because as a new parent, even I struggled with the limitations of what mainstream medical guidance can do. One is that sometimes it's unrealistic, honestly, to do everything exactly by the book, and knowing that there is some wiggle room to create your own style and modifications is really
Mm-hmm.
important without going to pseudoscience, without going to the wild west of, not safe internet opinions. But two, it's also, it's limited, right? The time that you have with your pediatrician is limited. The time that you have to sort of sort through all the noise out there and vet every single person is limited. And there isn't necessarily going to be an American Academy of Pediatric handout for every single question that you have or every single thing that you have. They may send you to some good resources, but it's hard. It's really hard to sort through it all. And so when I wrote, my first book and then my second book, I really tried to think, okay, when I was a new mom, what were like the top things that I just felt I needed a basic overview of. I needed to understand what the options are, why people are saying the opinions they're saying, which opinions are even worth looking over, what my choices are, so that I just have some sort of basic framework for approaching this. So, like you said, I wanted to understand not just breast versus formula feeding, but I wanted to understand, why are people even talking about this still? What are the ways that I can maybe make breastfeeding easier if I want to do that? What are my resources? Getting into topics like sleep, not do I have to sleep train or can I not sleep train, but getting more into the helpful information about it, which I think is you can sleep train. It's not an abusive thing to do. It's totally fine to do. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to do. But if you do it, here's some things you might want to think about. Here's why you're doing it. Why is someone recommending that you do sleep training? What resources might be helpful? So setting out that list of the highest yield topics for the first year. And then again, for my toddler book, what are the highest yield topics? Do you even have to toilet train? What is toilet training? Why is everyone yelling at me on Instagram that my kid is 2.5? And do they need to be out of diapers? Where is any of this even coming from? Where should I go? Things that I really wish I had beforehand. And that way, when the internet comes your way or when your friend says, oh my God, you haven't potty trained yet, you won't have that panic, right? That instinct of
Right.
something is wrong with me. I've done something wrong. You'll say, no, I remember, like, I'll deal with that when I get there, or there's no rush, or, oh yeah, I totally am all over that because it was a really important thing for me for this reason. So yeah, it's hard to find good information. I will say it's even harder to find good information that is realistic for you and works for you
Mm-hmm.
as a family. But ultimately, the information that you should be using and seeking and really deciding is good information is information that helps you, right? Advice
Mm-hmm.
isn't
Mm-hmm.
good. If a piece of advice out there is making you more anxious, that's bad advice, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Yes.
that doesn't qualify as good advice for you. If it's not realistic to be followed, then, or if it makes you feel like you're lacking, obviously there's some self reflection that you can do on that. We can always work to be more mindful and less anxious,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also sometimes okay just to ignore those voices that are making you feel worse.
Yes. And I think what you just said is so valuable. I hope everyone out there is listening to. But this paradigm that you've just presented of thinking about, why am I asking that question? And what does it mean? And what do I need to know about that? Then you can make a better decision, right? Like if the latest research on breastfeeding says the colostrum is really important, but breast milk is close to formula, then you kind of know, okay, well, if there's a 5% or 10% difference, is it that important to me? If there's an 80% difference, then maybe I'll think about it differently, right? Like once you have the why, then you can weigh more accurately, is it good for me? Does this work in my life? Does it work for my lifestyle? Does it suit my value system? So I think that's so important.
I talk a lot about the why, both online and in books and in a lot of different ways with different topics, because I think that's one thing that's so frustrating about all sorts of parenting information. Even sometimes the scientific parenting information will say, for example, your baby has to stay in your room with you for 6 months, to prevent SIDS, but without explaining all the different trade-offs and how strong that effect is. And actually, maybe there's some other things that are more important, and how do you mitigate risk in your own situation? That's just as one
Mhm.
example.
Mhm.
Versus someone else who might say, you can never tell your kid good job, which is something I've seen trending online, which is like, I know.
Really? I
Yeah.
haven't heard that one.
Oh, because it tells them to be too addicted to praise, or I don't remember some of the other, there's some nonsense.
Wow.
There's some psych theories behind things that people are totally misquoting and misunderstanding. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of things that just get put out there like gospel, and sometimes even from decent sources. And even if something is true, and to some extent, even to your point, like you said, it's true that breastfeeding does have some health benefits. That's true in a vacuum, but that might not be true in your situation. It may be true that breastfeeding was good for a little bit and then it no longer made sense because it was affecting your mood or your mental health or your physical health or
Or going back to
your
work or,
lifestyle or whatever. And that,
yeah.
so it's none of these things are all or none. Nothing is as easy as yes or no, do or don't do. There's just the benefit of something, and then there's the risk of something or harm of something. And then there's how does that translate to you and your family's values and your family's realities. And that translation part, first of all, you need the good information. You need information that shows you what the real risk and benefit is, the whys, like you
Right.
said. And then that translation part is really, it's sort of a joint decision between whoever is giving the guidance, but also you and how you're processing the guidance. And it's hard to find guidance that lends itself, to you having that layer of, oh, okay, this is telling me this is probably a good idea, but it's reminding me it's only a good idea if it works for me. And I think that's what's really missing. It becomes so easy to see everything as a prescription rather than, I would say, more like a toolkit, or a
Yes.
menu. I like to say, here's what you might want to think about as you make this choice. Here's why this medication, it's just like medicine. This medication is really important. And I think it's clear that we have to take it. Here are some of the risks of it. To me, it's a no brainer based on but you may have a situation where your kid has a different reaction to medications. And so someone needs to be taking that into account when they're,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when they're prescribing it. So it's really a team effort, and it's really about you kind of building that muscle that you have as a parent to say, how do I take in information that's high quality and hopefully useful and good, but how do I filter that through my own values and situation and insight and instincts? How do I sort of take that and make it useful and not just a source of anxiety and set myself up for failure? And
Right.
that's really, I think, what is missing in parenting these days is sort of us being given the grace and the opportunity to hone that skill, to develop that muscle of instinct and empowerment. It's a work in progress for me, but wouldn't it be great if we could give ourselves a little break?
Yes. And we need it because, you know, as you're saying, you're bringing up these issues about breastfeeding or vaccines or things like that. But not everything is of equal weight, right? So
Mhm.
everybody kind of looks at the parenting and says, okay, I want to be perfect at swaddling and I want to be perfect at sleep training and I want to be perfect at potty training and I want to be perfect at whatever and have the right answers for every single thing. And as you're saying, you need to also weigh in. How does this affect your life? How does it
Mhm.
affect your family? You can't put that on the back burner, right? It's so important to say, okay, well, what are the top couple of things that I really need to do? And maybe some of these things that aren't as important, I can let them go.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's no such thing as must or must not, safe is unsafe, yes or no. There's not this binary. It's not a checklist of parenting. And I know that's really hard because there's so much to do. It feels like that might be the easier thing, just to be like, check, check, check. But the
Hmm.
reality is that parenting is so dynamic. Things change day to day. Your
Yes.
decisions, your triage changes day to day. And there's really just a decision is just for a moment in time. And there's just the risk of doing something and the risk of not doing something, right? The benefits of doing something and the benefits of not doing something. Sometimes it's like you said with, you mentioned vaccines. Sometimes it's pretty clear and pretty universal. The benefits are going to outweigh the risks. And that can be a very low stress, low conflict situation. You can just say, okay, that makes sense. That's a checklist. But sometimes, like with feeding, whether it's breastfeeding or picky eating or meals or anything, sometimes it's going to be much more about averages and patterns and, give and take and
Hmm.
okay, I'm going to just do chicken nuggets all week because it's been crazy work week and my kid is growing fine and I don't want to make food a battle and a pathological situation and I just need them to eat and I just need to survive. That's fine. And then next week maybe
Yes.
you try family meals again and you go for it. And it doesn't mean that you failed one week and it doesn't mean that you were perfect the next week. It just meant that those trade-offs, they're happening every day. You just were being strategic about it. And so I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's less about how many boxes are you checking and more how deliberate are you being? How well are you honoring your values and your goals
Yes.
and checking in? That's much more important to me than, how many points did you score on a handout or something of,
Right.
of
Yes.
parenting to-dos.
Yes, but also to, as you said, to take advice from sources that are good.
Mhm.
If we only have so much energy to cook dinner and to make sure that we put our kid to bed well and read to them, to make sure that we're going to do the right thing by, getting home and making sure that we get some sleep, to do whatever things that we need to do, make sure we're going to be able to get up in the middle of the night. There's only so many things we can do in a day, right? So we have to
Mhm.
prioritize. And it's so important when you're feeling overwhelmed by all this information. You've got to do everything well. All of a sudden, sometimes everything gets equal standing.
Right.
And it's so important to talk to your pediatrician or get some real knowledge to say, yeah, you know what? If I don't swaddle perfectly, or maybe I stay up too late with my kid, it's not the end of the world. Or maybe if I stop giving them, breast milk, it's better because then I can actually get a good night's sleep.
Mhm.
So it's so important to be able to have those conversations so you can weigh what's important from what's not important.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing it's sort of related, but the idea of like, yes, pediatricians are a great resource and I'm obviously one. And I think that's a great place to get that information from, or my books or some similar thing to that. But, you are going to talk with your friends, you are going to talk with family and get their input too. And so even if you're still looking for other information, even if you're still wanting tips and tricks from your friends or from certain online sources you like, just going into that with a different sort of level of being informed and a different framework, so that when that person comes in and says, when you get that bit of information, whether it's from a friend or an online person who says, if you are not going to bed by by 8 p.m., then your kid will have neurological issues or something ridiculous.
Right.
I'm just trying to think of
Yeah.
something ridiculous.
Yeah.
But things like that are out there. So
Yes.
then you'll hopefully be a little bit less vulnerable to feeling like that is something that needs to occupy your stress and your brain space. And you'll have built that muscle and that resilience and that confidence that you have as a parent, so that advice can really be filtered, so that you can really filter things through the lens of what matters and what doesn't. And yes,
Mm-hmm.
pediatricians and hopefully guides like me, we're here to show you how to make that triage, how to create that filtration system. But ultimately, what matters to me more than listening to any one source is really how to listen to yourself and how to get the judgment you need to be able to sort through things. Because no matter how much we try, you're going to keep getting advice. You're going to keep getting information online and in real life.
Mm-hmm.
There are some ways to control the amount of input you have. It's going to be impossible to shut it all out. And so more important is understanding I can take what I need and leave the rest, and knowing what's
Mm-hmm.
good information, knowing what's helpful to you. That's the most important thing you can do, I think, at this point.
Yes. Very important. And
Yeah.
what sorts of difficulties do you see, or what sorts of topics do you see people struggle with the most?
There are a few things that are happening. One is I do think parenting is more challenging in a lot of ways these days. We are being expected to do more for our kids with less, community and societal support, with more societal strains. And so there is a reality that things are more challenging
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of real ways. So
Yes.
I'm not trying to mitigate that, or minimize that in any way. I'm not trying to say that there isn't true. However, the idea that parenting is all of a sudden so impossible, part of that is sort of a creation of this anxiety, is a product of how anxious we are because we are being told to be anxious about things we don't have to worry about. And so things
Mm-hmm.
as simple as what time should my child go to bed? Like I was just saying, that may not have been something that even caused a lot of worry, maybe when
Mm-hmm.
maybe it did for my parents. I don't know, but probably at some point. But
Mm-hmm.
I think, like you said, the importance that some things are being given, the amount of stress that's being put onto every single micro decision really is disproportionate. So it's important
Yes.
to think about sleep holistically. It's not necessarily important to obsess over nap schedules and routines and bedtimes. It's important to think about food and nutrition holistically. It's probably not important to think about what's the number of foods that my child eats and what's the exact ingredient in every single thing that they eat. That
Right.
probably doesn't make sense. So
Yes.
I think the big trend of this obsession with the micro decisions, just the idea that there's going to be an exact right answer, or it's super important to focus on every single day-to-day decision that we make. The questions are infinite that I get on that. And they're around topics like sleep and eating and vaccines and development and behavior and tantrums. And you could put any topic out there. But I guess what I've noticed is this trend towards questioning every single decision we make as a parent, every single small thing,
Yes.
rather than thinking on the bigger level of, oh, what do you think is the general way to deal with tantrums? That's a question I might get and I'd be happy to help with. And that's, I think, a very good question, is how do I deal with my kids' tantrums? But someone might say instead, I was told that I can never say this exact phrase during a tantrum, and I have to say this exact phrase during a tantrum. And what do how do I
Mm-hmm.
say this if it's
Mm-hmm.
not working? It's become so micro, so prescriptive,
Yes. It's true.
so restrictive, that I think that's really the trend I'm seeing that is most harmful.
Yeah, I agree. I also find in, the families that I see, since they're not traditional, there's a lot of like self-criticism there, right?
Mhm.
Like I may have a couple who are two men who are having a baby together with a surrogate, and they say, well, we need to have lots of parenting classes because we don't know how to parent. And I say to them, well, I didn't know how to either. When I had
Yeah.
my kids, they don't
Yeah.
come with an instruction manual, but
Mhm.
just because you're men, it doesn't mean that you have fewer abilities than I do. Or, they'll put a lot of stress on the surrogacy process because they're so worried that if the surrogates can't pump for them, then they're destroying their child, right? Or, some families who use donor conception and they think, well, is this going to be very hard because I have this extra layer here. I have this baby in front of me, and maybe somehow because they don't share my genetics, the feeding's going to be different, or the sleep's going to be different, or you're still having a baby.
Right.
So the baby's still going to poop and eat and do and burp and do all these things that you're going to have to learn the same. But because there's this extra layer, I find, of non-traditional parenting, there's this feeling like, well, I've already created something that's not quite correct. And therefore I have to find ways to be extra perfect.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to me. Not that it should be that way, but that it would be that way. Parents are so primed because they're being conditioned to think that they're not capable, that they're not able to synthesize information and get good information and make good choices. And so if you come into a situation that is even more ostracized in some ways, or even less welcomed into the world of confident parenting, of course, I would think you would be even more uniquely susceptible to that. One thing that is interesting to me is, thinking that, well, I want this to go a certain way, or we have to do this, or we have to breastfeed a certain way, or pump, or prepare this. I think that really speaks to the idea of control, and the idea
Mm-hmm.
that in parenting, listen, parenting is terrifying. I totally get it. It's terrifying now. It always has been, but I think even now, even with more expectations and more uncertainty, there's this idea that we would do whatever we can to protect our kids and to improve outcomes. And it's not that there aren't things we can do. There are. There are things that we can do to help and protect our kids. I think there's a false locus of control, meaning all of these tiny little micro decisions, all of these specific things are being given the kind of weight and given the kind of importance of being able to really, really meaningfully on some level help your kid or protect your kid,
Yes.
because one, because it sells things. So that's why they keep, pushing that. But two, the reason it's so easy to accept as someone with anxiety, I understand, is because who wouldn't want to buy into that? I would
Mm-hmm.
love to think that even if it's a lot of work, I would be happy to pump and make myself miserable for 2 years if I thought it would meaningfully protect my child in this world out there.
Yes.
Of
Mm-hmm.
course. The problem is, it's not that these things aren't beneficial in many contexts. It's just they don't have that sort of power that we are assigning to them. And
Yes.
so we are so desperate for some sort of control over what we're doing that I think we put it in the wrong places. And the things that we can control, like, are we creating a loving home? Are we feeling confident in our parenting? Are we taking good medical advice? Are we advocating for safe schools and safe spaces around us? Like, the
Mm-hmm.
things that really matter and that we could be doing, those get a little bit lost because we get so distracted, I think, by these other
Mm-hmm.
things.
And if we're not sleeping and stressed about all of this
Mhm.
and arguing with our partners because of whatever, then we can't be available as a good resource and as a good emotional experience for our child.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like, we're losing the forest through the trees. Absolutely.
So maybe in some ways, for some people, this idea of getting every single thing right almost feels like a self-esteem, like get out of jail card, right?
Mhm.
Like you're getting out of jail free, you're doing everything right, you can check the box, and so you
Mhm.
don't have to feel badly about yourself, which you shouldn't be feeling badly anyway, right?
Exactly.
I guess that noise out there is so misguided in telling people that if they do X, Y, and Z, then they will be the right type of parent.
Listen, it's really hard out there. It's really hard to get good information without, falling prey to really bad information or even more insidious information that can be good in some contexts, but it's just not yours. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not immune to it by any means, but I really do hope we're at a turning point where parents can start to see through some of this stuff, see through some of the artifice and some of the predatory, info out there, and try to turn inward a little bit. Focus not so much on these tasks and to-do lists and these, arbitrary definitions of perfect parenting, and just really think about, how are you going to make this experience joyful and impactful and meaningful for you? Because that's what the data shows matters to kids. They care about
Yes.
you and your connection and your ability to be emotionally available and your ability
Yes.
to feel confident and model confidence. And that's data, that's what data driven parenting really
Yes.
should look like. It should not look like you're sitting here weighing the data side by side for every tiny micro decision you're making. That's ridiculous.
Yes.
You're just using the body of evidence out there to make choices for your family, and your kid's gonna see that. They're gonna feel like, oh, my parent knows what they're doing. They know how to take care of me and love me and connect with me, and I feel safe with them, and I am now being shown how to make my own smart, safe decisions. And that ultimately is really the biggest thing you could do for your kid. So even if you don't do this for yourself, being a kinder parent to yourself really does help your kid.
100%. I agree with you 1,000%. That's so true. And I have seen parents actually kind of emotionally block their ability to be there for their child because of all these things. They may get so wrapped up in thinking, I have to breastfeed, I have to breastfeed, I have to
Mhm.
breastfeed. And then the child's losing weight because there's not
Yeah,
enough breast milk. And so all of a sudden the child's losing weight and they're so focused on breastfeeding that the child's losing weight. And that's much more detrimental.
absolutely. One of many examples.
Yeah. So do you have others that you've experienced in your practice?
Breastfeeding is a huge one where people just, lose their ability to nurture and bond and feed their kid because they become obsessed with that. That's definitely a huge one. Different sleep issues, being so obsessed with sleeping a certain way, whether it's co-sleeping with your kid because you feel like you have to, or sleep training because you feel like you have to, getting caught in these extremes where you don't come up with the sleep schedule and the sleep conditions that make sense for your family. The parenting scripts, they drive me a little crazy. I think sometimes they can
Mm,
be helpful, but parents being so obsessed with the exact words that they have to say in a tantrum and in each situation, rather than just saying the words that help them connect with their kid.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that really come up all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that we're not writing in pen, we're writing in pencil, right? Like
Mhm.
even if we make mistakes, that's human, right? And so we can repair mistakes. We can, have troubles and then try to fix them later. And that's all a process of bonding and connecting and growing as a family, right?
Absolutely. And that shows your kids too that they too can make mistakes and they too can learn and grow.
Yes.
And so, yes, the idea of being a little more flexible is really important.
Yeah, it's so important. And I'm so glad that you're sharing this with us because I think it's so important for the audience to hear from you, who's such a well-known pediatrician, that this is really important for people to take home with them, for them to understand what's important, what's not important, where they have to kind of get the right information and balance what's most important to them from what they really, need to do, because for every family it is different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, as we wrap things up, Dr. Diamond, would you like to share anything else with our viewers about how to prioritize their parenting experience, how to think about parenting, particularly if you have a non-traditional household?
Honestly, I thank you so much for just everything you're saying and sharing this message, because I really want all parents to understand that you really need to think about yourself, look out for yourself in order to look out for your kids. It's not like you're being selfish or choosing yourself over them, because it's not an either or. And I should know because I'm a pediatrician. So technically, I always joke, I care about your kid and not you, technically, right? On paper, my job is to take care of your kid. I just know that the best way to take care of your kid is if you feel confident and joyful and empowered in the choices you're making. So, especially if you're coming into this feeling already primed to have anxieties and insecurities about your parenting, which is understandable. It's most people these days. If you notice that in yourself, really take a minute and prioritize it and make some time to check in and think what resources would help you feel more confident, not just getting through those checklists and making what you think might be the quote unquote perfect decision, but really feeling empowered to be a parent, right? And to be yourself as a parent is going to benefit your child tremendously. And that is a pediatrician approved message.
That's wonderful. And we all start knowing nothing. So we're all starting in the same place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yep. No one knows how to do this. They really don't, but you will learn. You really will learn.
Well, thank you so much for that wise advice. And thank you so much for everything that you do in your books, on the internet, everywhere. And certainly here, we really appreciate everything that you're sharing with us, Dr. Diamond. And where can people reach you?
You can find me on Instagram at Parent Like a Pediatrician, and I will take your questions there and answer anything you have to ask. I have a lot of resources there as well. I'm on Substack. If you search me by name,
Oh,
Rebekah, Rebekah Diamond. And I also have 2 books out that I think are well worth checking out, really will help you feel more confident in what you're doing. The first is Parent Like a Pediatrician. That's for the first year. And the second is Eat, Sleep, Tantrum, Repeat.
wonderful. Wonderful. Well, that will be great homework for my listeners, I'm sure. So thank you so much for coming. And I really appreciate it. And for everybody out there, thank you for being here. Thank you for having confidence in yourself that you will get there, like we both have. We both have kids and we live to tell the tale. Here we are. And thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time. And please subscribe because that's how we keep going. And I will see you next week. Hi, it's Lisa Schumann. I hope that you enjoyed that video and I hope it helped you. And if it did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe because that's how we keep going. It's really important to us. And if you liked it, you might like this one.